Here now to bring us up to speed on the ongoing big tech antitrust battle and the risk posed to investors and opportunities as well is IBD tech reporter Brian Deegan. Thanks for being here today, Brian.
Very happy to be here with you, Valley.
So with the ongoing antitrust battle with these mega cap technology companies like Google, Apple, Facebook, Amazon, and Microsoft to an extent, what exactly is on the table here? We have lawsuits and legislation in the works.
It's something I like to call dogpile on big tech. Big tech in this case being Apple, Amazon, Google, Facebook, some cases Microsoft, and in some cases Twitter. And this momentum has been building for a couple of years, and it really started to hit a peak last year. And now this year, we recently saw here the introduction of 6 antitrust bills in the House Judiciary Committee that are specifically tailored at big tech and nobody else really. And, it's going to be a long process.
Mm-hmm. And so it's targeting so-called anti-competitive practices. What would you say is the likelihood of this legislation passing? It seems like there is bipartisan support, but the impact to these big tech companies is yet to be seen, but something investors need to be aware of.
Yeah, well, in terms of, there is bipartisan support, something we don't see very often, but it sort of ebbs and flows. And they're coming at it from different directions. But, when you talk about the likelihood of this passing, some quick history here. In 1975, there was United States versus IBM. It was an anti-monopoly lawsuit that went on for 2 years and then was dropped without merit. And IBM walked away. The charge was that they had too much control over business computers, and they absolutely were the dominant force. And then in 1975, of course, the famous United States versus Microsoft case, in which Microsoft was charged with monopoly power with the operating system and the browser on their system. That went on for a few years and ultimately got thrown out. Because the government could not prove the case against Microsoft. So in fact, Microsoft basically got a slap on the hand, and you see where they are today, one of the biggest companies in the world. So that gives you an example. This is going to be very hard to win a battle like this, because proving monopoly is going to be extremely difficult, in addition to the fact that these companies have huge sums of money that they can use to spend on lobbyists and lawyers and whatever you want to fight them. So you're not going to see any changes soon. That's absolutely certain.
An ongoing battle it is, but if we did happen to see some tightening and some oversight on so-called anti-competitive practices, what would that look like? It sounds like it would result in some pretty significant changes to a lot of the services that we know and love and use all the time. But what do you think would be the impact of these companies if they did have to spin off their businesses in a big way or be prevented from buying out smaller companies to expand their reach?
Yeah, well, the threat is real. I mean, these antitrust lawsuits are very broad and expansive, and to use an extreme situation, Google could be forced to divest YouTube. I mean, I absolutely do not see anything like that happening, but that's some of the direction that they're trying to go. They're claiming that these big techs have monopoly power in a way that crushes competition and innovation. So one of the areas they're going after is making it harder to do an acquisition, because as you often see, a $200 million company with a great idea gets scooped up by Facebook, and sometimes we never know what happens with it after that. A lot of this is what we call being baked in. The big investors are already sort of evaluating the potential outcome and have adjusted their level of stock interest in these companies. So to give you an example of what can happen though, recently here, Facebook won an antitrust lawsuit that the FTC had filed against them for monopoly power related to WhatsApp and Instagram. And that was filed in December. And when the decision came down, the judge said, sorry, FTC, you did not prove your case. You did not prove that Facebook has monopoly power. And the next thing you know, Facebook stock that same day hits a record high and reaches a valuation of $1 trillion for the first time. So once the pressure, once it becomes obvious what's going to happen, then you see these stocks react. But usually you won't see them react not violently, but aggressively until some decisions come down.
Mm-hmm. So even though there are potential risks here for investors, these can also be news headlines around and decisions around this antitrust battle can also be catalyst to the upside. Now, also, Brian, could you comment on the consumer side of this and what we're seeing on that front? In a recent IBD tip poll, there were some interesting findings around the support for breaking up big tech or not. Where does the consumer stand on this issue?
Yeah, I think when that poll was taken, I'm going to assume that consumers really didn't have a good enough background or knowledge of what potentially could happen or what was going on, because in the current antitrust case that's in the House, Google had made the argument that, hey, you guys better watch out what you're doing, because you could force us to effectively harm the consumer, to take away things that the consumers really want. You know how it is. Sometimes when you try to break something up, you make it even worse. I have a hard time actually seeing a major breakup in any way of these big tech companies. Proving an antitrust case is very difficult. And, and once the consumers start seeing that, hey, I'm going to lose this or I'm going to lose that, they're going to go, what? And they're going to raise their voices and the Congress is going to start to listen. I want to make a point here. Last year, they were working on what's called Section 230 of the Communications Decency Act. That was passed in 1976, and it is the law that is said to have built the internet because it gave liability protection to the internet companies. So, for example, if I posted something negative toward a person on Twitter, they couldn't sue Twitter, they would have to sue me. Twitter was not responsible for me putting liable content on their site. But this is where it gets rather strange because it came into focus because of the presidential election, where the social media platforms were so heavily used and abused that there was a lot of disagreement about what should be done. So they said, it's Section 230. We need to rewrite it or we need to throw it in the trash can. Those hearings went on for a while. The statement was that if they did rewrite it, they could rewrite it in a way that would force Twitter, Facebook, and all these social media sites to tear out of their systems any content that, say, I wrote and put on the website, because now they're responsible for what I write. So people wouldn't like that. I wouldn't like that.
Yeah, so that's yet another aspect of this antitrust battle. What would you say is the timeline that investors could expect this to play out? There's still a lot to sort through here. Do you think that as we progress and as these companies, in some cases, continue to expand their reach in various verticals, can we just expect this kind of friction to continue?
There's a lot of suits out there and moving at different paces. For example, the FTC suit that I referred to earlier has nothing to do with the 6 bills that were just recently introduced. Section 230 has nothing to do with that either. They're sort of separate. The other thing I would point out is Europe is going after big tech in a very aggressive way. They're finding they're taxing their profits. They're doing a lot of stuff that the Washington legislators are looking at. And Europe tends to be much harsher on these companies than the United States might normally be. So I know Google. There's a Google suit out there. I forget which one it is, but there's an own suit against Google. Amazon is being pursued because of the way they treat their third-party vendors. So there's a lot of moving parts. In the manner of speaking, you just don't know until you know, until it finally comes down. Like nobody knew recently here that Facebook decision was coming down. So usually these things happen, and you find out after the fact, and the stock's already moved before you get a chance to do anything. But like I previously said, these are hard cases to prove. And me personally, I maybe they're going to do some touch up around the edges to make it look like they did something. But I have a hard time seeing anything major that would cause one of these companies to be severely hurt. Again, referring back to Microsoft, I mean, that was a very aggressive case against Microsoft from monopoly power, and they couldn't do it.
Well, we'll have to see how it all unfolds. And we know, Brian, that you're going to be covering it and keeping us up to date every step of the way. But really good for investors to stay on top of this. If they own any of these stocks, they should be aware of the potential impacts of even just headlines with all of the antitrust drama. So thanks so much for being here today, Brian.
Thank you very much.
Hi there. Thanks so much for watching Investing Strategies on our YouTube channel. If you want more executive interviews and analysis of key trends to watch, make sure you hit the subscribe button so you can stay up to date.